The number one reason that most gardens fail to thrive is some kind of issue with watering. Today we're going to talk about 5 mistakes that I've personally made in my own garden, and you're probably making them too. Number one is going to be the time of day that you're watering. And let me go ahead and start off by saying, if your garden needs to be watered, if your soil's dry, if your plants are wilted and it just needs the water, don't wait for the best time to water your garden. Just go ahead and get it watered, because getting it watered is better than waiting until the best time to water it. I'm just going to air quote everything today. The best times that I'm talking about are going to be more so a schedule for your garden rather than kind of catching up or getting your dry garden watered. So if it needs some water, give it some water. What are these best times that everyone talks about? The short answer is early morning and early evening, but why? The biggest reason is evaporation. If you water your garden during the heat of the day, it's going to evaporate so quickly that some of your shallow rooted plants or your seedlings, they're not going to be able to access that water fast enough before it gets evaporated. If you're watering your plants early in the morning before the heat of the day, it's going to give those roots time to really soak up that moisture and really get it set up for the day. It's kind of like giving them a cup of coffee first thing in the morning. Do you like your coffee? Because I need my coffee in the morning. If you're watering in the early evenings, once again, it gives those plants time to really soak up some of that water, and then it gives it a little bit of time to evaporate off before night falls, when it's not going to evaporate really at all. You don't want to do it too late into the night, because then that water is just going to sit there all night. You know, you can kind of end up with things like root rot and things like that. Number two is not mulching your garden. This isn't just about watering, this is about soil health, this is about watering, and this can honestly be the difference between a successful and unsuccessful garden. It regulates the water in your garden, the temperature in your garden, it protects your soil, it adds nutrients to your soil, prevents soil from splashing all over your leaves, causing all kinds of bacterial issues and fungal issues, and the list honestly goes on. There's a lot of different mulches that you can get or just kind of get around your property. Those are going to be things like pine needles or straw, even shredded newspaper, wood chips. You can use leaves from the previous fall. Here at my house we use, hold on, let me show you, compost. I use a good organic compost, and I put 4 to 6 inches of compost on top of my garden every year to use as both nutrition as well as a mulch. The type of mulch that you're using isn't nearly as important as actually using mulch. Whatever type you have available to you, whether you go out and buy some or you just find it around your property, get some mulch on your garden. It's going to help you so much. Why is doing what I'm doing right now one of the worst ways to water? Man, it killed me to do that. That's because it's number 3, which is watering from above. Plants like this tomato here right behind me, they do not like being wet. They are really susceptible to all kinds of diseases and fungal issues, and them being wet kind of leads to a lot of those issues. And it's not just that the plant's getting wet. When you're watering from up above, you're watering from a much higher height than you should be, and what's happening is the water's coming down, it's splashing onto the dirt, and that dirt is splashing onto your plants. And within that dirt can live different fungal diseases and all sorts of different nasty things that can really wreak havoc on your plants. Plants are pulling the majority of the water from their roots. When you're watering from up above, you're watering all this extra soil that really doesn't need to be watered. If you water it down by the root system, the roots are going to be able to absorb that water, and you're not adding all this extra water into your bed, which is going to contribute to weeds, and really it's just wasting water, spraying it all over your beds where there's no plants to soak it up. If an overhead sprinkler is what you have to water your garden, and you don't have the option of spending money on a drip irrigation system like I have with my drip tape that you put on an automated system and you do it that way, you don't have the time to come out here every day with your little watering wand and spray down by the roots. If you don't have the luxury of, having those options, and your only way of watering right now is setting a sprinkler outside your garden and kind of spraying the whole garden all at once, then you should continue to do that. It's still going to work for you. It's just going to work better if you're watering at the root level. This isn't going to be one of those things that's a make or break for your season. It's just going to help your season, and you won't run into as many issues, but don't let it bum you out or discourage you if that's not an option for you right now. What is the biggest mistake you've made in your own garden, whether it be watering or otherwise? Go down into the comments and let me know what your biggest mistake is. I'm excited to read them. Number 4, this is honestly the biggest watering mistake that people make, not just beginners. This is a mistake that even experienced gardeners make. and that is under and over watering your plants in your garden. It is so easy to fall in the trap of loving your plants too much. What happens is, you know it's hot, you know it's dry, so you give them water. You feel like that's what they need. Then it's hot the next day, so you give them some more water. And then it's hot the next day, and you give them even more water. You just keep giving them water because you feel like that's what they need. And then you finally realize, like, oh crap, maybe I give them too much water. So then you start to dial back that water, right? You start to pull back because you realized you overwatered your plants. Before you know it, you're underwatering your plants. And it's kind of this yo-yo effect that every gardener goes through. And it's not something that you learn to equalize in a single day, a week, or even a season. It takes a long time to figure it out. I'm still figuring it out a lot of the times, but don't let it overwhelm you. It's something that just kind of comes along with gardening. First, let's talk about the biggest issue that people make with underwatering. What that is they come over to the garden, they start watering it just like I am here now, right? They come over, they start watering, and as I'm watering, I can see the water pooling up on top of the garden. And I'm like, oh man, that's kind of a lot of water. Let's move on to the other plant here. As your garden gets dry, it almost turns hydrophobic. It doesn't want to absorb the water that quickly. It becomes really easy to come over to your garden and just quickly hit it with some water. You see it kind of pool up there, so you just kind of keep moving. And you're really only getting the first half inch of the soil at that point. You're not really giving it a deep watering like it needs. Raised beds are gonna drain and dry out much more quickly than an in-ground garden. So if you're used to an in-ground garden and then you switch over to a raised bed, you're gonna be really surprised at the amount of water that this kind of runs through. Raised beds do a great job of draining through the bottom. So if you do overwater it, it does give you a little bit of forgiveness there because it drains out of the bottom. But what it also does is the sides of the garden, they heat up, they evaporate, the plants are sucking all the water out, the water is draining out of the bottom. So you're gonna move through water a lot more quickly than what you're used to in an in-ground garden. So this is definitely something to keep in mind because you don't want to underwater your plants that are in your raised beds. When you do water your garden, whether it be through an automated system, through hand watering, whatever it might be, you want to come over and you want to dig in your garden. See how wet the soil actually is. If you feel like you really saturated your soil enough, dig down a little bit. See how deep it went. If you're only watering it, half inch, 1 inch down, those roots aren't getting that water and you're gonna be underwatering your plants. My issue with overwatering has been my drip irrigation system. I have drip tape that runs through all my beds. It is on an automated system that I just set. It waters my garden and I don't really worry about it too much. But the problem with that is when I first started it, I was running it every single day for like 30 minutes because that's what I set my old drip irrigation to. Well, I learned pretty quickly that all my plants are getting way too much water and I had to cut back a little bit. So now instead of doing every single day, I do 3 days a week. And that seems to be a good happy medium for the temperatures we've currently been having. It's starting to get hotter, so I'm gonna have to go through a whole nother learning curve on how I should be setting the drip irrigation. And that's just all part of the process. Overwatering also becomes a huge issue in container gardens. Last year I had a massive container garden. This year not so much, but last year I did. If you don't have drainage holes in the bottom of your containers, it's really, really easy to overwater those. Even if you do have drainage holes, it's really easy to just fill that bucket or that container up with water until you see all the water pouring out of the bottom, and then you just kind of think to yourself like, okay, I filled it with water, it's fine. But what you're doing then is you're draining all that nutrition, all that good stuff in your container. You're draining it out of the bottom of your container. And you really need to think of it as a raised bed or an in-ground garden. You want to water that to where the roots are, and you don't want to go too much further than that. For me, I definitely overwatered my container garden quite often, and I had to add extra fertilizer in there because I was just washing it all out. Another thing to look at is the weather. If you've got rain in the forecast, maybe hold off on watering your garden, kind of wait to see how much rain you get and then water your garden if it needs it, but only if it needs it. And if you feel like you've been overwatering your garden but you aren't quite sure, look at your plants. You'll be seeing they'll start turning like a pale green color. Even oftentimes they'll wilt. It's not just dehydrated plants or underwatered plants that wilt. They can also wilt if they're overwatered, and that becomes a fun one trying to figure out. And number 5 is treating all plants equally. Each plant has different watering needs, and if you treat them all the same and water them all the same, you're gonna end up with some pretty unhappy plants. Drip irrigation is extremely helpful. It waters pretty much the entire garden, does a pretty good job, but it doesn't do everything I need it to. When I set up my drip irrigation, I mainly set it up so I didn't have to spend hours out here watering the garden. I only had to spend 15 minutes. It allows me to go on vacation for 3 to 5 days without the whole garden completely dying. It keeps my garden alive, but it doesn't let my garden thrive. Every single day, I come home and I walk my garden. I look at how everything's doing, and every single day there's something out here that needs water that isn't getting the water it needs from the drip irrigation. Different types of plants are gonna have different watering needs throughout their life cycle. Take a tomato, for instance, watermelon, cucumber, any other type of melon, all these different plants, as they start building those fruits are full of water, and you need to be giving them that water to really build that up. Don't just throw water on your entire garden and just expect everything to be hunky-dory and totally fine. If you take one piece of advice from this entire video, I want it to be this this piece right here. Spend time in your garden, hand water when possible, get to know your plants, get to know the different types of plants within your garden, how they react to different amounts of water. It's not gonna happen overnight. It's not gonna happen this season. It's gonna take a long time to learn. I've been gardening for a lot of years and I'm still learning a lot of these different plants, but I love it. I love everything about it, and you will too. Do you grow on raised beds, or are you thinking about possibly getting raised beds in the future? If so, watch this video right here. In this video, we go over 7 common mistakes for people growing in a raised bed garden. If you enjoyed this video, you're gonna enjoy that one too, so go ahead and watch that video and I will see you there.